Yeah, there you go. Beautiful.
Perfect.
All right. Okay.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining.
We'll give people a few more minutes to trickle in, and then we'll plan to get started soon. All right, Rebecca, you want to take it away?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm glad you were all able to join tonight. Um, we have a webinar tonight on the residency personal statement. And we can introduce ourselves, Dylan, I think, in the next slide here. So my name's Rebecca. I'm one of the Elite Medical Prep tutors. Here at Elite Medical Prep, we work very closely with schools and students with individualized study plans, residency advising, and also tutoring for medical school exams as well as the MCAT. I'm a dermatology resident in Miami, Florida, and maybe Dylan can introduce himself too.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. My name's Dylan, also an elite medical prep tutor. I also do, like Rebecca, residency advising. And I'm currently a cardiology fellow in Pennsylvania. Um, so we're excited to speak with you guys tonight. A little bit about, I'll kind of go back to our title slide, your residency personal statement with or without ChatGPT, how to get it right. Um, I'm going to let Rebecca kind of give you a little bit of an introduction of what we hope to get out of tonight. She'll take it away, and then we'll swap halfway through. But before we get started, please ask us questions. We want this to be super interactive. We will have a Q&A at the end, but if you have questions um, as they come up, just throw them in the chat. You can message one of us individually either if you don't feel comfortable. We will have polls throughout the night as well. So please interact. We want to get a better idea of how we can best help you. And the only way we can do that is if we hear from you. So don't be shy. We're here to help. Rebecca? Take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Dylan said, this is all about the residency personal statement. Here we are at the end of August, so I know that you're kind of looking at this timeline and getting ready for the residency application season and submitting your ERAS. And one of the major components of your application is your personal statement. This is your opportunity to share anything unique that you want programs to know that maybe doesn't have a spot somewhere else on your application. So it's important to convey everything that you want to share, but also do it in a way that's very meaningful and has the impact that you want. So that's what we're going to talk about here, especially in the era of AI, where I'm sure everybody is familiar with the AI use in formal writing these days.
Awesome.
So again, we have our timeline here. So you may have already started writing your personal statement. I think that's our first poll coming up, but you may have a couple of drafts under your belt. But if not, that's okay. There's still plenty of time here to put together a good personal statement for your application coming up here. So. Yeah, just a few other check boxes here. We have a residency timeline resource that you can use. And, tonight's webinar is focused mostly on the personal statement, but you can see some of the other check boxes here to finalize as well and refer back to this resource as you're putting your application together.
And we'll have this presentation will be shared online on our website.
Yep.
So, like Rebecca said, even though we're having this primarily focused on the personal statement, we do have some other check boxes here that we advise you to kind of keep track of. So, as you can see here in August, again, we highlighted in red that your personal statement really should be finished up soon. But there are a lot of other small things, especially for those who are IMGs, you need to pay attention to. But don't worry if you don't get all this information down. We're kind of glossing over it, just like Rebecca said. We want to focus on the personal statement today.
Yeah. So,
Uh, this is, I think, the same thing.
and
Okay.
this is, yeah, just another zoomed in version of what you should be hoping to finish and accomplish by the end of the month, gearing up for, the ERAS submission deadline at the end of September.
Perfect.
So definitely keep track of all those dates. But moving into the personal statement, there's really no specific prompt that they share, but I tend to think of it as writing about your personal story. These are your personal characteristics that brought you to medicine and also your specialty of choice. I think it's nice if you can also talk about some career goals that you have at the end, if you know what, kind of trajectory you see yourself following. It's always nice to bring that full circle and try to tie that back to some of your unique characteristics that brought you to medicine in the first place, because a lot of times some of those earlier years shape what we ultimately end up going into later on. Um, there are maximum characters and words allowed. Generally, you want to keep it to one page. I don't think it will allow you to go on to more than one page, or when you upload, you really want to keep it to one page. And something that I think some students maybe don't know about until it's a little bit later in the cycle is that you can upload as many versions of your personal statement as you want. So you can personalize your personal statement for different programs. Now, maybe you don't do this for every single program, but if you have a top 3 or top 5 programs that you're really interested in, or maybe you have a certain connection or certain experience that really draws you to that program, I think it's really great opportunity to show that program that you took the extra time to personalize your personal statement for them specifically. You can keep a lot of the same motifs throughout your personal statement, but again, adding that personal touch that's unique to that program really shows your passion and dedication. Dylan, I don't know if you have something else to add about that as well.
No, yeah, I completely agree with everything. The small things I'll add is, like Rebecca said, your personal statement should be one page. Often students will ask me, how do you define one page? What I generally tell them is if you open up Microsoft Word, 1 inch margins, size 12 font, single spaced. It really should not be longer than that. Some people will use 1/2 inch margins, but I tell them try to stick to 1 inch margins. So use that as your reference. I don't actually remember how many words that is, but it's definitely not 4 to 7,000. It's much shorter than that. And then I agree with Rebecca. So if you are going to submit individualized personal statements, it definitely should be just for a few programs. I personally didn't. I sent the same personal statement out to all programs, but that's just one approach. One of the things that we would advise against is, let's imagine you're applying to 80 programs, submitting 80 individual essays. I'd say that for 2 reasons. One, you're probably going to make a mistake at some point and accidentally upload the wrong document to the wrong school. And two, I find it really hard to imagine that anyone could write 80 really personal messages to each program. If you say, I want to attend X school because I like this area of the country and like this thing about this area, they're going to read that and say, wow, you could have substituted out a lot of different schools that fit this criteria. So if you're going to write something for a program, it really should be unique and it really should be genuine. That's why I agree with Rebecca. Keep it to a small number if you're going to do it. You don't
Yeah.
have to, but it's totally okay if you want to as well.
Yeah. Yeah,
Awesome.
that's a good point. You certainly don't have to. Yeah, Dylan didn't. I did. I personalized for a
Yeah.
couple of mine. So, both approaches work really well, but make sure, like Dylan was saying, that it's something unique and something really special that you want to share with that program. I wouldn't talk about weather. I wouldn't talk
Yeah.
about climate. I wouldn't talk about the environment, right? If you have family, if you have a certain
Right.
research interest, like those are things that otherwise the programs will kind of see through, I think.
Yeah. Agreed. All right. Let me.
First poll. So perfect. We'll just give a few seconds here for everybody to get their answers in. Very good. Give it 3 more seconds. Right. Good. So we have a little bit of a mix, which is good. It's totally fine if you haven't started yet. Maybe tonight's the night where you start brainstorming some ideas that you want to maybe include. And for those of you who have already started a draft or even are finalizing or revising your personal statement, that's great. You've got plenty of time to get that final draft done and also maybe have a few different sets of eyes look at it too.
I may have gone. Okay. Here we go.
Alrighty. So, how do you actually want to go about writing your personal statements? The first bullet, keeping it short and sweet, I think is really, really important. Like we said, it should be 1 page. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, that it will let you upload for even if it goes on to a second page, but I wouldn't do that. I would really keep it to 1 page. You don't want it to go on to 2 pages, and that means you have to be really intentional with the things that you include and how you describe your experiences that you want to include in your personal statement. I would think about some common motifs that you have going throughout your application and include some experiences that maybe complement those that you've already written about in your application. I think personal statements can sometimes be a missed opportunity for students who simply regurgitate their whole CV again because they've already read that. But use it as an opportunity to enhance your themes and the motifs and the passions that you want to communicate through your application. And I'm really big on stories. I think it's far more impactful to demonstrate a story where you showed leadership versus just saying, I have leadership skills, right? Demonstrate something that lets the reader deduce for themselves what those qualities are that they would be looking for in a resident. And those are examples that they can then ask you about during your interview and use to learn even more about you. It makes it very unique to you and it makes it very memorable, which is important when, they're going through so many thousands of applications every season.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I,
Well, if
I
you have anything
agree.
to add as well.
No, overall, I completely agree. I especially with what Rebecca said about telling a story. I've read so many applications where it's a regurgitation of what your CV shows, and to
Mhm.
me, and I'm sure Rebecca agrees, that's just redundant in that
Yeah.
you have this opportunity to tell more about you in free form and prose, and you're
Yeah.
just using it to replicate what you've already written. So I love it when people tell me a story that I couldn't have gotten elsewhere in their application and then if I leave a personal statement being like, I want to know more about that story, that's a great personal statement. That's generally when I know like that is someone I want to learn more about. I'm excited to interview them,
Yeah.
irrespective of what the rest of their application shows. But that's when at least I know someone's written a great essay.
Yeah.
Is when I want to know more. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And then on the flip side, right, it's kind of the opposite of what we were just talking about. It's nice when your personal statement complements the rest of your application without being redundant and sharing the same experiences over and over. It's also incredibly easy to ramble. You want to include a lot, and you have such a short space to do that. And so it's easy to sort of run on and ramble and write really long sentences. So go back and really be intentional about the words that you choose and how you structure your writing so that it's very clear to the reader. Um, don't write what you think reviewers necessarily want to hear. What they want to hear is your story, right? They want to hear what's unique to you. They want to hear what you're passionate about. They want to hear about what brought you to medicine, what brought you to your specialty, where you see yourself in 10 years when you're an attending or, and you're finished with your training. So there's not one correct answer for something to write about. And I think that the more unique to you it is, the more memorable it is for the reviewers. Um, a lot of times, it's, I think in an effort to be unique, which is good, but sometimes people write in hyperbole or use some generic terms that maybe make it a little bit more confusing. I tend to tell students that you don't want the reader to have to work hard to understand your personal statement. It demands a lot of effort from them, and they're already having to read so much writing when they're going through applications. So make it an impactful story, but also make it relatively easy to follow for your readers. Of course, don't plagiarize, right? This should all be your own writing. It should all come from you. I think in this day and age, and we'll get into AI a little bit later in this talk, but in this day and age, it's very easy and very tempting to steal writing from other places. And you really want to try to make this come from you. And I think you can tell. It's easy to tell when that's the case and when it's not. Um, a couple other points here. Don't try to teach medicine, especially if it's to people that are already trained in your specialty. It's great to talk about your passions. It's great to talk about why you want to go into the certain specialty of choice. But I wouldn't try to give a lesson about guidelines or something like that in your personal statement. And then again, we're going to get into AI a little bit later, but don't rely on AI to create your personal statement. It really should come from you. And even if you don't think so, I think it's pretty easy to tell now when something is AI created versus when it comes from you. So maybe Dylan has some thoughts too.
I think the points that I want to highlight that I often see students, I'll say flounder with is bullet points 3 and 4, writing what you think the reviewers want to hear, and then speaking in generic terms or hyperbole. I'm sure the number of essays that I've read where we're going to talk a little bit about the hook, but the hook is the first sentence of the essay where it's I stood by the bedside and I held my grandma's hand with this patient's hand where there was blood everywhere. Like I get it. It's like really impactful for you, but for us in healthcare, often that's like a day-to-day experience. And while that I'm glad that means a lot for you, that is just our job. Like that is what we do on a regular basis. And often, if you tell us a story about medicine, it's not telling us anything about you. It's actually telling about a story of someone that then impacted you, which is fine. But the number of thousands of students who use that structure, it often comes off as hyperbolic, and it often comes off as I don't and actually know anything about you other than you want to be a doctor, which is great, but I don't know who you are. The second thing, 100% agree with Rebecca. It is so easy to tell when something is written with AI. And I think, and we're going to talk about this, but there's an art to using AI to augment your work. And then
Mhm.
there's a detriment when you use it to replace your work. And the latter is so easy to tell. And it if we are able to tell, and maybe this is an unfair conclusion that I come to, but I get really upset about the applicant, and I don't know why, but I think it's because it comes off as disingenuous. So please, like we're going to talk. We wanted this webinar to be about the importance of the personal statement, how to crush it, but also to recognize that AI is playing a role in our lives and how we can use it to supplement your individuality, your personality, and your originality. So, but these are, I think, really important things to keep in mind. Um,
Mhm.
great. Okay.
Next poll. Okay, most challenging part of writing your personal statement. So we'll give this also about 20 seconds. Okay, end it right there. Okay, so it looks like B, C, and D. So writing a strong opening. Yeah, we'll talk about the hook as well, too. Showing what makes me unique. Yeah, I think. it's easy for people to feel like they don't have a lot that makes them stand out, especially when you've been in medicine and you've been with your peers for so long. But just remember that you're the only person with your story, right? That makes you unique, in and of itself. Okay, organizing and refining ideas. Yeah. So for those of you that are on the editing or reviewing and finalizing your final draft, sometimes organizing and refining the ideas is challenging, especially given that you have such a small amount of space to work with. Um,
Yeah, I think we're going to address almost all three of these things
yeah.
on the next few slides. So
Yeah.
these are super common hurdles to overcome. So
Yeah.
let's dive in.
All right. So, how to start? I think there's lots of different ways to start. I mean, I can talk about how I start, and then maybe Dylan has another approach, but I think you should just start writing. I don't think you should worry about the space. I think you should just think about some examples and some stories that you want to include about your journey, and then you can refine it later, right? Start with who you are. That's ultimately, like, seriously, what people want to know about their future residents. They want to know who you are and what qualities you're going to bring to the table, what qualities you're going to bring to their program, right? And so you can spend all this time writing about other people, other patients, other experiences, but if they don't know who you are at the end of your personal statement, then sometimes they're, what they're left doing is guessing, and you don't want to leave them guessing. You want them to come away with the impression of you that you want them to have. Um, I think it's good to describe why you are choosing your specialty. They care a lot about that, right? And there can be all different kinds of reasons for that. It could be a personal experience, a patient experience, maybe something else that you want to share, but I would think about how you would want to package that in your personal statement. Um, and then you can talk about some of your strengths and possibly weaknesses that maybe you're working on, or maybe some challenges that you've overcome on your journey to becoming a physician. Again, I would really tell these through the perspective of a story that really shows the example. And what students often forget to do when they share these stories is they start telling about what happened and what they did, and then they forget to go back to the outcome, the impact. They want to hear what happened, not just what you did, but then what happened after that. What was the impact, right? So always try to remember to bring that full circle. That's going to really demonstrate the qualities that you want to showcase in your personal statement. Um, any influential experiences and mentors, these can predate medical school. So if you had something really influential that happened in your life that is really well connected to your career trajectory, I think that's meaningful to include. It's also very unique. While I know some people share the advice, don't share experiences on your CV and your ERAS that predate medical school, if there's something that really shaped who you are, I think that can be really unique and something that you would want to maybe think about how you would include. Again, the stories are going to be your best way to showcase the qualities that will make you an excellent resident. That's what the reviewers are really looking for. And then I think if you can share some goals at the end, like maybe goals for residency, what do you want to accomplish in residency, maybe goals for your future practice, do you see yourself doing subspecialty training? Do you see yourself working with certain patient populations? Really also helps to give the reviewer an idea of who you are as a person and what really matters to you, what you're really passionate about. And again, right, the stories, the patient encounters, those are really, really meaningful. And I would try to include maybe two or three. Sometimes, students only spend a long time writing about one. And while that's great, I would try to use your space very wisely, the limited space that you have. So that's kind of my approach, but I'd be curious to hear yours, Dylan.
Yeah, I always tell students to look at yourself in the mirror and ask who you are. And
Mhm.
um, if you ask your friends, your siblings, your parents, they're all gonna have different answers.
Mhm.
And saying, "Oh, I'm, Dylan Eiger and I'm a medical student," that's not the answer that we're looking for. We want to know who you actually are deep down as a person, not as a student. So I often tell students, ask your friends, ask your family if they had to describe you in one sentence, what would they say? And get an idea of like how people characterize you, and maybe use that as a springboard of like, all right, how can I encapsulate how people feel about me in a story? that I can write down. So I think that's something that I love. Um, I agree with keeping some of the clerical stuff so that you probably should mention why you chose this specialty. What your goals are, I think is a great thing to include too. Again, the meaningful patient encounters is okay if it tells them something about you, not the patient. Like the goal should not be, hey, I saved this patient's life. Like that doesn't tell them anything about you as a person. So there's a lot of great options here, but I tend to gravitate towards who you are, because that's really what we want to know. Okay.
For sure. Yeah. Okay. And then again, right? So going back to the stories and the examples, you don't just want your personal statement to be, I have leadership qualities and I like working as a team. And right, you don't just want to list a bunch of qualities that you want to share. You want to show that you have those qualities through actual stories and examples. So show your passion for medicine. How are you going to demonstrate that? How have you been demonstrating that throughout medical school? What about your passion for your specialty? Maybe there's an experience, some type of leadership experience within a student interest group. Maybe it's something extracurricular. Maybe it's a volunteer experience. Maybe it's something that happened during one of your rotations. But don't shy away from really demonstrating your passion for medicine and your specialty of choice. Um, and again, right? Like I think a lot of times students focus on strengths, which is good. You definitely want to demonstrate those. But there are also lots of lessons that we learn, right? We learn so many lessons throughout medical school. We make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. I keep making mistakes every single day and I learn from them. And sometimes those lessons are what is the springboard towards launching you to your next step, your next direction that you want to go in. And that can be really impactful. That can really stick with people because I think, a lot of times people can relate more to challenging experiences that they share with other people than the successful ones necessarily. I think that's when you do a lot of your learning. So if you can include some of those experiences, I think that's really impactful. And then I also think that sharing a little bit about your personal background and identity is important. Um, in a way that's tasteful, right? And Dylan can talk about this too. You don't want to share very, very personal and emotional information, right? That can sound a little bit too invasive, like a bit of an overshare. But something unique about your upbringing, especially as it relates to your career choice, I think is awesome to include. So kind of think about how you might do that without oversharing. And then, of course, building an outline, everything that you want to include, each paragraph could be a story, or maybe each paragraph could be a lesson that you want to share, but it should be organized and there should be a clear transition between like one paragraph and the next. You don't want it to be choppy, like it's three or four different stories in a row that has no connection and no progression. There should be a clear transition as well. And, starting from the intro too, which we'll talk about that and the hook as well.
Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to highlight is the end, building an outline. What I normally tell my students is for every paragraph you write, you should be trying to convey one major point about who you are. So think about what each paragraph's purpose is, and then, like Rebecca said, have nice segues and transitions in between to craft the story of telling who you are. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I think this is when I take over. Is that right?
Yeah. So I'll let
Okay.
Dylan take over this poll.
Cool. All right. So this poll is who would you feel most comfortable asking to review your personal statement? Mentor, a professor, a current resident, a medical school colleague, a friend or family member, and then a professional advisor or editor. I'll give you guys just a few seconds to answer. And there's definitely more than one right answer. So, all right, I'll give you 5 more seconds. All right, three, two, one. Okay. All right, so we had about half of you say current resident, which I actually think is a great option because these are people who just went through the process. They were clearly successful in it. But then we had some people pick a mentor, a professor, a medical school colleague, a professional advisor, editor. We didn't have anyone pick a friend or family, but that's probably because we have a small sample size. Truthfully, I think all of these people are great. I think residents are fantastic, and it also could be a bad resource. Having one resident read it is not a bad idea. but I think it's great to share your essay with multiple people from different backgrounds. So I think faculty members, definitely. Residents, definitely. Medical school colleagues, sure. Professional advisors, people in your office of the dean or your educational office, these are all great resources. Rarely do I recommend that students rely on the advice of just one person, including myself. Like when I work with students, and I'm sure Rebecca's the same,
Hmm.
and we work on their essay together. I tell them, take the essay you and I created and give it to someone else, and let's
Hmm.
hear what they say. Because they may say, hey, your idea sucks. And
Hmm.
that's important to get multiple different perspectives because you're going to have multiple different people read your essay. So I actually think everyone on this list is appropriate, even friends and family not in medicine. They can provide a perspective of, can I even read this and understand it as someone who's not the most medically well versed? There may be admissions committees with people who are not physicians. They're often people who are APPs or departmental staff who are also reading these applications. So it needs to be an essay that can be applicable to a broad audience. So definitely get multiple eyes on your essay from multiple different backgrounds. Okay. Rebecca, you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, the only thing is, whoever you do end up showing, make sure it's someone who's actually going to give you positive or honest feedback, right? Like sometimes, you might share with friend or family member that that's amazing, they support you in everything that you do, um, but they don't necessarily tell you where your areas for improvement are. So make sure that you pick people that are actually going to give you honest feedback too.
That's a great point. And Fabiola, I see your question in the chat about sending us personal statements. We'll address that at the end during our Q&A. Okay. But great question. All right. So just moving on a little bit. When we've kind of talked a little bit about how to develop your ideas, how to get started. Once you start writing, it can definitely be a process. And in my personal opinion, what I struggle with the most is the hook. The hook is that first sentence that is meant to physically hook or metaphorically hook your reader into the essay, making them want to read more. And that sentence is extremely important. And we'll talk about examples of what are good and bad hooks. We've already talked about the importance of using your space diligently. Again, each paragraph should convey one main point about you. So think about, hey, I just wrote these four sentences. Why did I write them? Like, what is the purpose of these four sentences together? Um, Complement aspects of your application. We particularly use the verb complement, not replicate, because we want to hear, if you're going to talk about something on your application, we want to hear something we haven't heard already. So it could be
Mhm.
more about the emotional side of things or challenges you overcame within those certain activities that really developed your character. Multiple drafts, truthfully, in my opinion, is a non-negotiable. If you're writing one draft, you're either the world's best writer or you're naive. So please write multiple drafts, even if it's different essays. Like I don't want you to think you have to take one essay and just revise that one. I often think it's a great idea to write three essays, completely different, and then say, do I like one more than the other? Do I like bits and pieces of them? And start to develop one final draft. And then, as we kind of alluded to earlier, decide whether or not you will include content specific to a program slash city. We can talk a little bit more about that at the end, especially Rebecca, since she did that, of how you can do that in a way that's tasteful and that doesn't seem kind of like something sticking out of the middle of nowhere. It flows nicely into the actual prose of your essay. You have anything to add, Rebecca?
I know that's great.
Okay. All right. So I think we've, at least for now, done a little bit in terms of like, what is the personal statement? How do we recommend you get started? We're going to talk a little bit about AI, and we're happy to answer any questions about that. But we'll start with this poll, which is, how are you currently approaching AI for your personal statement? I don't plan on using it only for brainstorming outline, for editing and grammar. I'm unsure how to use it, and I have considered using it to draft content. All right, we'll give you just a few more seconds. All right, three, two, one. All right, so we have the majority of people saying for editing and grammar support, which I think is great. We'll talk about that. a good number of people also saying I don't know how to use it appropriately, which is exactly why you're here, which is fantastic. And we do have some people saying I've considered using it to draft content, and I appreciate someone saying that because I think we've all had that thought of like, hey, can I use AI to like write me a draft, or can I use AI to come up with ideas for me? And we'll talk about the reasons why and why not to do that moving forward. Um, Before we dive into AI, a few last things about the actual nuts and bolts of the essay. The first, and we just spoke about this, are hooks. So I want to read you two hooks, one that's good and one that's not so great. Um, the first one is actually from a student I worked with, and it was one of the best hooks I've ever written and I've ever read, excuse me, and it really got me excited about her essay. And I'll tell you, this was not her first draft. Okay. So what she wrote is I've always had a passion for words, how a single sentence carefully crafted could leave a lasting imprint on history. However, that all changed upon entering a tank for the first time during basic training. So when I read this, I read her application first, and she was a medical student, kind of like all of us. And then when I read this, I never knew she was into writing, and I also had no idea that she was in the military. Neither of those things were in her application, and I was like, wow, this is out of left field. This is interesting. I want to learn more about this person's interest in writing, literature, and then also their experience in the military. I think that's something quite unique. Does it have anything to do with medicine? At face value, no. But you as a reader, you're like, why did she mention this in her residency application? Let me figure out why. And then she developed this beautiful essay about how the lessons she learned from writing and from war actually helped her to become a better physician. Okay. The other option here is I chose to pursue a career in internal medicine because I enjoy problem solving, multi organ system pathology, and providing longitudinal and interdisciplinary medical care. Now, is that a bad sentence to write? By no means is it, but that should not be the first sentence of your essay. That sentence is not unique to anyone, right? Anyone could take that sentence, throw it in, and it would be adequate, but it would not be a great option to start with. So if you said, Dylan, is that a good sentence to explain why you want to go into internal medicine? That's fine. But that should not be your hook because I'm an internist and I'm like, all right, great. You told me why my job is good, but I really haven't learned anything about you. And I don't really have this desire to want to learn more about you. As harsh as that sounds, that's the reality. So spend time with your hooks, and I think this is definitely a sentence you could throw by people and saying, what do you think of this? Like when I tell you this one sentence, how does that make you feel? That's a really good way to gauge, do I have a good or a bad hook? You have any thoughts, Rebecca, on good and bad hooks or?
The only thing I would add is don't use a hook if it only makes sense when you get to the end of the essay.
Oh yeah.
Because then I'm like the whole time so confused reading it, like, how does this relate? And I'm like more focused on that than actually reading and comprehending what you're saying in the rest of your essay. So the hook should be a hook. You want it to draw me in when I'm reading, but also should make sense like pretty early on. Like
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to get all the way to the end for me to be like, oh, okay, that's why. That was the hook.
Gr- Fantastic point. I was reading an essay last week where someone mentioned a patient encounter, and we've already talked about the pros and cons of that, but they're like, I'm going to make up a name. Julia laid at the bedside and something, something, something. Then the next three paragraphs were about this person's clinical record and their academic track record. And I'm
Yeah.
sitting there the whole time being like, who is Julia? And they tell you who Julia is in the last sentence. And I
Yeah.
realized I completely ignored everything else they wrote because I was wondering who this Julia person was the whole time. So agree with Rebecca. The hook should bring you in and then you just roll with that. Don't hide anything from us. And like Rebecca said, make this easy for us to read, right? Make it easy. That's a really great point.
Yeah.
All right. So editing, we've kind of alluded to this already. Swap it with other people, ask family, ask mentors, ask your residents, ask everyone. And for especially this last bullet point for non-native speakers, we need to convey your English proficiency. For I guess the main reason is, like we just said, we want this to be easy on us to read since we're reading so many of them. When we do come across an essay where the English or the grammar is not top notch, it does make it harder for us to read. And I think we're fallible as humans, sometimes that leaves us with a sour taste in our mouth. Whether that's fair or not, it's a different discussion. But if we leave being like, wow, that took a lot of effort to get through that essay, that doesn't always make us feel great about you as an applicant. So where I'm alluding to what we're going to talk about, but I actually think this is a great use of AI here is to help you with your English proficiency. But that's definitely something to keep in mind for non-native English speaking. Okay. This is clerical stuff before we dive into the AI, but make sure all your edits are there. You've proofread it a million times. Other people have proofread it. Upload it to ERAS. It has to be formatted correctly. You can find all the instructions online. And then make sure you assign it to the right programs. Like Rebecca said, if you're going to make program specific essays, don't do too many. You want to assign the right program, the right essay. If you're like me and you just make one essay, you can blanket assign it to everyone. So just be careful with how you do it. All right, moving into the last part of our talk, I'll try and move quickly since I want to leave time for question at the end. This is a really nice publication that just came out a few months ago called AI-Induced Never Skilling in Medical Education. And it's been written by physicians and educators at a lot of different institutions. And I highly encourage you all to read this if you're interested. But it talks about this phenomenon of never skilling, which is not only happening in medical education, but in many other industries across the world where people who are considered experts in a specific field are no longer developing the skills which define them as those experts because we're offloading them to AI. So, for example, when I'm in the hospital and I have medical students with me, when I ask them to come up with a differential, often I'll see them type in the patient's symptoms into ChatGPT or Claude or Open Evidence and ask the AI algorithm for a differential diagnosis. And then they'll say that back to me. I can immediately tell when it's an AI derived differential, but also that doesn't teach you anything. Like when you're at the patient's bedside and they're crashing and you need to come with a differential, Claude's not going to be there to help you. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is what AI should be and how it should be used in the context not only of you writing your personal statement, but how we would advise you to use it going forward as a physician. So, broad strokes, appropriate and inappropriate uses of AI. I think brainstorming and outlining is great. If you're like, hey, these are the things I want to convey in my personal statement, these characteristics, these stories, these parts of my application, how do you think I could structure this? Right? You're giving information to the artificial intelligence and then asking for help with how to structure or how can you build off of these ideas. You're not saying de novo, come up with something. Revision and editing, I think, is probably the best use case of it. These machine learning models are trained on God knows how many different examples of writing. So, especially for those who are non-native speakers, putting in your essay saying, hey, please revise this for grammatical errors and stylistic errors, that's a great use. Okay. Now, know that nothing's perfect. There are many times where I've read things from artificial intelligence and it's technically grammatically correct, but it doesn't sound like a human wrote it. So there's a fine line between having good grammar, but also being genuine to and adding that human touch to it. English proficiency and grammar, we kind of just spoke about. Now, inappropriate uses, these are huge red flags you cannot do. Do not ask it to write a draft for you. Like, without a doubt, do not do that. The reason why I say don't do that is because it's going to write a draft for you. And even if it's the worst draft in the world, I can almost guarantee you it's going to bias you in how you write your next draft. Because you're going to be thinking about, well, ChatGPT did this. So what if I just pivot a little bit from that? Even if you don't mean to do that, it's going to happen. So please, please, please do not ask it to write a draft. And then for any of the appropriate uses, do not accept the changes, the edits, the suggestions blindly. You have to fact check everything. So again, it's great for editing. It will still make mistakes. I don't care 100 years from now, it's still going to make mistakes. So make sure everything you ask it to do is fact check. Okay. Rebecca, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And if you are someone who has already asked it to write a draft for you and you are going with that, try to put it away and start from scratch and then maybe compare after. I know it's really hard once you have that draft in front of you. You know, AI is it they're it's good at sounding good. But
Right.
that doesn't mean that the piece of writing that it generates is good, and it doesn't mean that it appropriately reflects you and what you want to convey. So if you've already, made the mistake of having it complete a draft of your personal statement, try to put it aside and try to put it in your own words.
Yeah. Awesome. So here's a brief example. I just put this together last night and I threw in my credentials. So I'm applying to IM residency this coming cycle. Please write me a personal statement. I attended Duke University and studied chemistry, then went to Duke University for medical school where I engaged in research. That's all I gave it. Okay. Now, caveat, this is the free version of ChatGPT. Maybe the paid version's better. And then you don't need to read this. It just says, absolutely, I'm going to build you a strong personal statement. It doesn't ask for any more information about who I am. It just says, I'm going to write it. I'm going to please you as the user, and I'm going to write a personal statement. And here's the first paragraph that it came out with. So this includes the hook. I've always been drawn to the process of understanding how individual pieces come together to create something more complex. That is the most generic, boring hook I've ever read. I have no idea where you're going. I have no interest in going along with you. It's just boring. It's great writing in the sense that it's grammatically correct, right? It flows nice. The length of the sentence is good, it's short and sweet, and it conveys a point. But I am not interested in that point whatsoever. And then it just fills in with garbage. As a chemistry student at Duke, I learned to approach problems by examining their fundamental concepts, recognizing pattern, and asking what happens when those components interact. AI has no idea if that's actually how I think. Like, what if I hated my chemistry major, right? So know that it's going to fill in stuff that's fake, that's it's seen written elsewhere, and it's going to write something that is not reflective of who you are as a person. So know that getting these drafts are so bad. They're so, so bad. I've even played around where I try to feed these algorithms multiple pieces of information about who I am, and they still fall flat. It feels so plastic and mass produced, and we can spot it from a mile away. So please try and avoid this whatsoever. So the kind of two pearls that Rebecca and I have is AI should help you and not replace you. I don't think there's ever going to become a time when AI replaces us as physicians. The most important thing that I want to leave you all with is any task that you're asking AI to do, you should be able to do yourself. Okay. You should be able to write a personal statement on your own, like 100%. There's nothing wrong in having a tool to help you do that. There is something wrong in having a tool to do that for you, so you never know how to write a good personal statement. Writing is a part of what we do in medicine. Rebecca and I write tons of notes every day. It's something we have to do. It's in the medical record. Patients read it, and God forbid one day you're going to be part of some case and the legal team's going to get involved and they're going to look at your writing and be like, "You wrote this." So you need to know how to write, and this is just one of those steps in getting there. So you should know how to write a personal statement. That doesn't mean you can't get help when writing a personal statement, but just there's a distinction between the two. So we've got about 11 minutes left. We want to leave this time for Q&A. So please type anything you want in the chat. And if we could, I'm sure you all have your own personal statements and would love to get advice from Rebecca and I about them. This is kind of to answer Fabiola's question. We would like this Q&A to be more about general points about the personal statement rather than your own individual personal statements. If you'd like to work with one of us or one of the other tutors at Elite Medical Prep, our contact information is right here. You can actually send us an email and set up a time to meet with us where we can go over your personal statement together and we can give you individualized feedback. Rebecca and I have read, I don't know how many personal statements, so we have a lot of experience under our belts. And we'd love to help you guys in any way possible. So, with that, please answer or ask us any questions that you have, and we'll go from there. And if you guys don't have questions, that's fine too. But Rebecca and I will probably start asking each other questions.
Well, and I see a couple in the Q&A section.
Oh, I'm missing
Um,
that. Perfect.
yeah, there's a paragraph in my personal statement that appears as if it was 100% AI when I put it in random Google AI detector websites when it was not 100% AI. It was like 30 to 40%. What should I do?
You want me to take this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. So, that's a really interesting question. Uh, so I'm not going to try and act like I know how these AI detectors work. My suspicion is that if they detect a certain amount over some threshold, it's just going to blanket say that this is 100% AI. It's better to be wrong. Uh, Sorry, it's better to overestimate how much was used by AI than underestimate. And I would ask you this question. If you put it in, I got an essay and I put it into an AI detector and I read 40% of this was written by AI, when you're telling me 30 to 40% was written by AI, how would that make me feel? I don't know. I probably wouldn't feel great, right? So what I think I'm going to tell you to answer your question is if there's really like any measurable percentage that is being detected as I can almost guarantee you any human reading it is going to just blanket say, this smells like AI. I'm going to default to assume all of this is AI. That's how I would read them. So if anything is coming up as AI, I would take that as a red flag. Now, if it's like 3%, 5%, that's probably just within the realm of error. But if it's telling you it's 100%, I would actually trust that and say there's a red flag that the way you're writing sounds quite generic. I don't know, Rebecca, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, I would, it's kind of interesting when I was reading this question because if I know that I wrote something, then I wouldn't think to put it through an AI detector, but I guess that's something that students are doing. And if it's like, yeah, if it's close to like half detecting that something was AI generated, I would try to rephrase it honestly. Because you want to feel connected to your writing, like if you are submitting something that you didn't write, like when you finish your personal statement, you should have this sense of pride and like connection to your story. You really want to feel that. And I think if you generate a piece of writing that really makes you feel that way, it shouldn't pick up a lot of AI. I mean, I'm not like an engineer or anything like that, but that would be my feeling about it. And I think it's kind of like the next question that was asked, other than the obvious tells do programs know if you used AI to help with the personal statement? I mean, you have to think about it as a lot of the people that are reading your personal statements, their chairs, their residency directors. These people did not finish residency last year. These people were reading applications decades ago when there was no AI, right? They can tell a difference between AI is now just big in the last couple of years, right? They've been reading applications for, some of them decades. So they
Right.
can tell a difference, in writing that's genuine, that came from a student versus writing that came from a machine. It's just something that they can pick up on. So that's why I would be, definitely careful, to answer your question, are there obvious tells? I think people can tell, especially when they have that much experience. They're reading thousands and thousands of these papers.
Yeah. And I will just add one point, if any of you are paying attention with
Mhm.
the news of kind of these AI, these machine learning algorithms, Claude is now putting what they call digital footprints in their actual text. So they're intentionally writing their AI responses to be detected as AI generated. It's a good ethical question that we can talk about at a later time. So for those of you who use Claude, the answers it give you are written in a way so it can be detected. So even if you tell
Mhm.
Claude, hey, write it like a human would, it's not going to. Now, I can't speak for every machine learning algorithm, but I would assume that every machine learning algorithm is going to do the exact same thing. So I'm with Rebecca. We're going to know. You are like submitting an application to some of the smartest people in the world. Like they're physicians. They're very smart. They're going to figure this out. Um, that doesn't mean, again, you can't use it to help you. But if it's writing anything, we're going to be able to tell. The next question we'll answer is, should you address any application red flags in personal statement or save it for elsewhere? Rebecca, I'll let you answer this one. Oh, I'm not sure. Rebecca may have frozen, or I'm frozen. I'm not exactly sure. Um, I'll go if it, are you guys able to type in the chat if you can still hear me? Okay, perfect. I'll take this. Rebecca's probably having some technical difficulties. But should you address? Oh, hey Rebecca, you're back.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
I
no
froze
problem.
a second.
I was just going to give you this next question of should you address red flags in your personal statement or share it for elsewhere?
I think it really depends. I think if there is a place that makes sense on your application, something that is connected, then you can definitely expand on it there. If you, sorry, Dylan, can you, I think I might.
Yeah, you're going in and out. I'll take this one over just to for purposes of time. But I think what Rebecca was getting at is if there's something that's a big red flag that is really hard to ignore, I don't see a reason to not address it in your personal statement. Obviously, you want to put as much of a positive spin on it as possible. But it's also, I don't want you to all think that if you don't address it in the personal statement, it's going to feel like you're hiding something. Okay. Now, there is a section of your ERAS application to address extenuating circumstances or things that have affected your training. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with that. Most students leave it blank. Okay. Most students leave it blank. But it's really kind of it was introduced a few years ago as an opportunity for students to talk about things that impacted their training. This could be extenuating life circumstances or having a child or losing a family member or I've seen students who unfortunately get suspended and that's where they'll talk about it. So if there's a red flag, it could go there. One of the most common, I guess, red flags that comes up is, hey, I didn't do well on my step exams, or I failed step one, or I failed COMLEX, or something like that. Should I be addressing it there? I tend to advise students to not talk about it. Um, you'll be able to show how you've overcome that barrier of those exams through your application. And importantly, you'll be able to address it when they interview you. Often, if you failed an exam or you didn't score well on an exam, if you get that interview, they're going to ask you then. Now, some people may make the argument of, hey, it's like hard for me to get that interview if I don't address it, which is fair. It's a fair argument. But I would come back and say, you should, if you failed step one, or if you did add up some other red flag like that, you need to find ways to supplement your application to show, even though I had this hiccup here, I've excelled elsewhere. Okay. Rebecca, I think we've got you back now.
I apologize. I live in Miami and we have a huge storm blowing in from the ocean, so
Oh, okay. That'll
I
do it.
apologize.
Just so you know what I told them, I basically said if there's a huge red flag that's hard to ignore, I don't think it's a bad idea to address it. But there is a section in ERAS where you can talk about extenuating circumstances or things that have happened to you, like family troubles, financial troubles. I often advise people to put that there if there's something that they want to address. But I was just ending with if it's something like step one failed or something like that, I tend to not address it because that's a common thing. So,
Agree.
you'll show how you overcame that through other parts of your application.
For sure. You don't want to call too much attention to it, too, you
Right.
know.
Right. And then how about I give you this one, Rebecca? What's your suggestion on mentoring setbacks in personal statements? Should it just be a sentence or does it deserve more explanation?
I think it's similar to what we were just discussing. And I think if you're going to mention it in the personal statement, it should be in a way where you can demonstrate how you overcame that setback and then how it helped propel you forward on your journey. I don't think it's very useful or meaningful or impactful to just say, I experienced this challenge and that's it. I think
Right.
it should be something that contributes to your success later. And so if it's a story like that, then I think it's great to include and what you learned and how you grew. And so that's how I would think to include it in the personal statement.
Yeah, so I have a PhD, so I did a lot of research, and one of the questions that I would always get asked is, Dylan, what percent of the time do your experiments not work? And I'm so transparent with it. And I say 90 to 95% of the time. Just my hypothesis is wrong. Something breaks. I mess something up. And I talk about how that made me such a better scientist. But you can't just say, oh, 90% of the time I'm wrong. And there, you really need to show how that impacted you and made you a better scientist or physician or whatever. Those are all the questions we have written. It's 8 o'clock. We don't want to keep you all here. If there are any final questions, please feel free to leave it in the chat. Again, I have this. We have one more question. I'll just end with this last slide again, then we'll answer this. But you can scan this QR code. You can email us if you want to set up times to meet with us or someone else on our program who can help you with your personal statements or any other aspect of the application. Feel free to stick around, but we'll answer this question and then we'll probably call it a night to be
Mhm.
respectful of all your time. So Rebecca will say, how do we end up choosing the topics to be written about? If there's so many things I write, I want to talk about. I feel like I have lots of things to talk about, but not much about each one, just like 1 to 2 sentences of each. Um, what do you think? So it sounds like someone's got a lot of different ideas, but they're not
Yeah.
sure. They're small individually, but they haven't found a way to come up with something cohesive. What would you recommend?
So I think what I would start with is write them all out and really see how much you have for each one, because it might be more than you think, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is if you're using stories, I think it's okay to use two or three to make a point about one sort of broad topic or one point that you want to make in a paragraph. Again, as long as you make sure that everything is nice and well connected and very cohesive. Right. And then the third thing is you may end up just deciding and seeing actually some of these things aren't quite as impactful as others. And so I want to prioritize because, a lot of times you can't say everything in your application, but that's what the interview is for. So if there's something more that you can expand on, you may mention something in your personal statement, and then there's more that you can talk about during the interview. So that's kind of how I would approach it. I would write it all out and see what's truly impactful, use your stories and examples, and then pare it down from there. But that's just my approach. Dylan maybe has some other ideas too.
No, I completely agree. Write things down. That one hook that I showed you earlier about from one of my students where she mentioned literature and being in the military. Like at face value, those two things don't have much in common, but the way she explained it was just so beautiful. And she took two things where she's like, I like these two things. I'm not sure how they relate, and found a way to relate them and made it, then tied it all in a knot at the end, saying, this is how it's going to make me a better doctor. So she wrote, I did exactly what Rebecca suggested, which is just write it out. I told her, write out your thoughts about each one. Let's circle back. Let me read what you think about each one. And then we found a way to put them together. So even though they may be small and may seem fragmented, once you put them out and lay them out in front of you, often you'll find a way to craft this beautiful story. Okay. All right. I think last question. Do we need to write our personal statement as if it was a story? What do you think, Rebecca?
I think I think you want to use different stories that connect to each other. I've seen personal statements that are just one long story that's all the same, and it gets a little bit monotonous, a little bit boring to read. And I've seen personal statements that use so many different stories and lots of different angles, and that gets a little bit too busy and overwhelming. So I would kind of start with your hook and your background about yourself, have that connect to your first experience or story, have that lead into your second experience or story, and then have that lead into your conclusion and your sort of thoughts for your future career trajectory is kind of the approach I recommend.
Yeah, I agree. I'll leave you with this. When you are applying for residency, um, and you're getting an interview, they know on paper that you are qualified to be there. Like everyone who's getting an interview is good enough to be at this hospital. What they're then trying to figure out in the interview is, do they want to work with this person? Right? Like there's too many qualified people for residency, but there's a finite number of people that are qualified and fun to work with, and that's what they're trying to figure out. That's what they're trying to get from the personal statement and from the interview. For residency, I often do recommend students talk about themselves through stories. I don't want you to think this has to be storytelling, but you're giving anecdotes about who you are, what you've done, what you've accomplished. and then talking about how that makes you who you are. Now, I will say, I know this is the topic of the webinar today, but the fellowship personal statement is quite different. The fellowship personal statement is meant to be super boring. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to do clinically. This is what I'm going to be in 10, 15 years, right? That's because when you're applying for fellowship, it's more of a job interview. Like they see you as a potential faculty member. Right now, that's not what the goal of this essay is. There should be a little bit, like Rebecca mentioned, of where do you see yourself in 10 years? But that we didn't tell you to make that the bulk of your essay. That's because we want to know who you are as a person. Like that's really what these residency programs are looking for. So it doesn't have to be a story, but I feel like the alternative would be a laundry list of your accomplishments, which we very much don't want because we have that in your CV. Any last questions? These are all great. Thanks for sharing them. All right. I think we'll call it quits. Thank you all for joining us. You've got our contact information. Please feel free to reach out. We love helping students, love reading their essays and giving feedback. And best of luck. You're all going to do great this application cycle. And if we can be of any help, just reach out.
Thanks for joining, everyone.
Awesome. All right. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye. Care.